The place card was cream stock with gold lettering. Carmen Reyes-Ochoa. Same calligraphy as every other card in the room. Same ink, same font, same flourish on the capital C. It looked exactly like it belonged. It was sitting at table 7, last table in the formal dining room, 6 feet from the catering station, half hidden behind a floral arrangement the size of a small tree. I stood there holding it longer than I should have. 43 minutes before 60 guests were scheduled to walk through the front door. The room was dressed and lit and perfect. Ivory linens, crystal glassware, candles in tall glass columns placed by hand. The string quartet was warming up on the terrace. I could hear the low sawing of a cello through the open French doors, music that made the room feel like it had always been this way. I read the card a second time, set it down, picked it up again. I have run a professional kitchen for 4 years. Before that, 2 other kitchens, line cook, then sous chef. Before that, my father's kitchen from the age of 9, standing on a step stool to reach the prep counter. I know what it means when something is off. Sometimes you smell it. Sometimes it's a sound at the wrong moment. Sometimes it's a temperature that should be hotter, and you know before you taste it that something went wrong. I'd had that feeling the moment I walked into this room. I came through the side entrance, off the kitchen corridor, because I'd been sorting out a glassware issue with the caterer. Ginevra had wanted the good crystal, not the rented kind, and there had been a miscommunication I'd offered to fix, because fixing things is what I do. I walked the dining room the way I check a pass before service, systematically, far end to door. Table 1 was set for 10. The plan was both families anchoring it, the DeLucas on one side, my parents and sister Sophia on the other, with Marco's grandmother Lucia at the head because she was 84 and earns the head of every table she'd ever sit at. I approved the seating chart 3 weeks ago. One note, my parents listed before the DeLuca extended family because they were the bride's parents, and the bride's parents come first. I read the table 1 cards. Richard DeLuca, Ginevra DeLuca, Lucia DeLuca, Frank and Maria Castellano, Anthony and Rosa Ferrara, Robert and Diane Marchetti. 10 cards, 10 DeLucas and their associates, not a single Reyes-Ochoa. My chest did what it does in a kitchen emergency, went very still. Not empty, the opposite of empty. Every sense sharpening at once, cataloging, the way you assess a fire. How big? How fast? What can still be saved? I kept checking. Table 2, DeLuca cousins. Table 3, the Marchetti extended family. Table 4, Ginevra's Arts Foundation colleagues. Table 5, Table 6. I found my family at table 7. My mother's card beside my father's, Sophia between them, then my Aunt Rosa, then my cousin Pilar. Every Reyes-Ochoa in the building, seated at the last table in the room, beside a rolling cart that would shuttle dirty plates to the kitchen. I stood there with my mother's card in my hand and thought about the sewing machine in my parents' spare room. My mother bent over it for 3 weekends, pins between her lips, adding lace to the sleeves of a dress she'd altered from an old one because she wanted to look right for this. I thought about my father's charcoal suit on the back of his closet door, tried on and rehung twice in the past month. 3 weeks ago, with the careful neutrality of a man who doesn't want to seem like he's asking too much, he'd asked me, "Is the rehearsal dinner formal? Should I wear the suit?" I told him yes. I didn't tell him that the question itself, the fact that he was calibrating himself for this room, made something ache in my chest I couldn't name at the time. I can name it now. I set the card down and went to find Diane Marchetti. Diane had been Ginevra's event coordinator for 11 years. Small, efficient, communicated almost entirely with clipboard gestures. In 7 months of peripheral involvement in this dinner's planning, she had never once addressed a question directly to me. Everything went through Ginevra. When I offered opinions, she wrote them down with an expression meaning noted and will not be implemented. "Diane, who changed the seating chart?" She looked up, expression unchanged. Mrs. DeLuca made adjustments this afternoon. She said you were aware. I was not aware. She said you'd approved the changes when she called this morning. I had not spoken to Ginevra this morning. I'd been at Raíces until noon handling a supplier issue, phone in my bag for 3 hours. There may have been a missed call. There may not have been a call at all. That distinction was less important than the fact that Diane was telling me with a level face that I had agreed to this. I'd like to see the original seating chart, the one I approved. I don't have the original on hand. You're a coordinator. You have everything on hand. A pause, the flicker of someone deciding whether they're paid enough to be in the middle of this. Apparently not. You'd need to speak with Mrs. DeLuca about the specifics. I looked at her one more second, then I walked away. Let me tell you about where I come from, because it matters. I grew up in Doraville, Georgia, in a 3-bedroom ranch house where the yards are small and everyone knows their neighbors' cars by sound. My father, Ernesto Reyes, came to Atlanta from Oaxaca in 1992 with $200 and a recipe for consommé his mother had been making for 40 years. He started with a food cart on Buford Highway in 1994, parked outside a laundromat, open from 6 in the morning until he sold out. He sold out every day for 3 years. He saved enough to rent a space, then to buy it. He has been at that address for 22 years, and the line outside the door every Saturday morning has never gotten shorter. My mother, Carmen Ochoa de Reyes, came to Atlanta speaking no English and learned it from telenovelas and the elementary school in Chamblee, where she eventually became a bilingual aide. She can quote you the Georgia State curriculum standards for 3rd grade reading comprehension, and she can make a mole negro from scratch that takes 2 days and tastes like the specific memory of someone else's grandmother's kitchen, which is the highest thing I know how to say about a dish. My father taught himself accounting from a library book. He sat with me for 4 hours when I told him I wanted to open a restaurant, went through the business plan line by line, and told me which numbers were wrong. He didn't say it was too risky. He said the depreciation schedule on commercial kitchen equipment was longer than I'd projected, and I needed to revisit my contingency reserves. That man was sitting next to the catering cart. I opened Raíces 4 years ago in a 900-square-foot space in the old 4th Ward that had been a laundromat and before that a bodega. I gutted it myself. The menu is Southern Mexican fusion, not because I thought it marketable, though it turned out to be, but because it was the food I actually came from. My grandmother's mole with Georgia pecans, my father's consommé with sweet potato and collard greens, cornbread made with masa, the food that happened when Oaxaca met Atlanta in a Doraville ranch house and decided it didn't need to choose. 8 months after we opened, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution called Raíces a revelation, the kind of restaurant that makes you understand that fusion, done with this level of intelligence and love, is not compromise, but synthesis. I cried in the walk-in freezer for 4 minutes and went back to work because we had a full house and 3 tickets backing up on the pass. Marco brought his parents 6 weeks after that review. Ginevra ordered the short rib, ate half, and told me the space was charming, warmly, correctly, with a smile at room temperature rather than heated, charming, like a child's drawing on a refrigerator. I told myself, she's from a different world, give it time. I gave it 18 months. I am standing here with my mother's place card and understanding, finally, that time was not the variable I thought it was. I met Marco DeLuca at a farmer's market in Decatur 2.5 years ago. He was buying heirloom tomatoes from a vendor I also used, and he asked me why I was squeezing the ones at the bottom of the pile instead of the top. I told him the bottom ones had been there since early morning and were a better measure of how the whole batch had held. He looked at me and said, "That's the most interesting thing anyone said to me at a farmer's market." We had coffee. We had dinner the following Friday. He remembered things. The vendor's name, the dish I was perfecting, my lease renewal conversation. He said my restaurant was extraordinary, like the word was doing actual work in his mouth. He said my parents sounded like people he wanted to know. He said he hoped someday to understand how my father had built what he built. I believed every word. I want to be clear about that. I believed him because he said it the way people say things when they mean them. I had no reason then to understand that a person can mean something in the moment they say it and still choose differently when the moment costs them something. The first time Ginevra called me Marco's girlfriend from the restaurant, I told myself it was a slip. The second time, shorthand. By the fourth time, I'd stopped counting because counting would have meant admitting what I was counting. I made the calculation I've heard my mother make, my father make, every person I know who has stood in a room where they were being tolerated rather than welcomed. The cost of saying something is higher than the cost of absorbing it, so you absorb it and call yourself gracious. And gracious is a word that sounds like a choice, but is sometimes just the name you give to not having one. I was gracious for 18 months. I found Marco in his father's study. Dark wood, leather chairs, the smell of a room kept formal rather than lived in. He was adjusting his tie in the mirror. He turned when I came in. "Your mother moved my family off table 1. He did not look surprised. That was the first thing. I watched the half second before he managed his expression, and there was no surprise, only management. The pulling together of a face that had been rehearsing this conversation since this afternoon, when I now understood he had seen the revised seating chart and gotten dressed anyway. The Castellanos needed to be at table 1, their dad's oldest development partners. Mom just needed to... She moved my parents to seat her business associates. It's not about your parents, it's logistics. Logistics. I kept my face still. In a kitchen emergency, the worst thing is letting the heat get into your hands. I had learned long ago to keep it internal. "It's one dinner," Marco said, stepping toward me. The step of a man who has learned that proximity communicates care, even when the words don't. "After tomorrow, it's us, our home, our rules. Let me get through tonight and I'll talk to her. Tomorrow, I promise." I looked at his face. I had been looking at it for 2.5 years. I knew the line between his brows when he was genuinely worried, the asymmetry of his smile when it was real versus social. I was looking for the thing that would tell me he had found out 20 minutes ago and was already building toward fixing it. There was no such thing. His face was calm, his tie was straight. He had gotten dressed and he had decided this was manageable. I walked out without answering. Down the corridor lined with 4 generations of DeLucas at graduations, groundbreakings, galas, everyone exactly where they were supposed to be. Near the end, I stopped. A black and white photograph, paper slightly yellowed, a young woman outside an apartment building in a neighborhood that no longer exists. Looking at the camera with an expression I recognized, not defiance exactly, but something adjacent. The expression of a person who has arrived somewhere that hasn't yet decided whether to let her in and has decided, regardless, to stay. The plaque said, "Lucia DeLuca, Atlanta, 1962. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I kept walking. My parents arrived at 6:45. I watched from the side entrance as they came up the front walk, my father in the charcoal suit, my mother in the lace-sleeved dress, Sophia behind them in burgundy. They were walking the way my parents walk somewhere new, slightly slowed, taking in the architecture the way you take in a kitchen you're cooking in for the first time. My father straightened his tie on the front step, not because it needed it, because his hands needed something to do. I went to them before they reached the door. My mother hugged me completely, the way she always has. She smelled like her kitchen and the floral soap she's used my entire life. I held on a second longer than usual. I guided them inside. I introduced them to Richard DeLuca, who was gracious in the hands-on-shoulder way of a man who has been gracious at events his whole life. I introduced them to Anthony Ferrara, who mentioned the Buford Highway taqueria, and my father's face did what it does when someone says the right thing, a slight loosening, warmth behind the eyes. Then Diane began directing guests to seats, and the tide was too organized to interrupt, and I watched my parents find table 7 with the quiet efficiency of people who have spent their lives being redirected and have learned to make it look like a choice. My father sat down. He placed his hands flat on the tablecloth. I have watched those hands my entire life. The knuckle scar from a prep knife in 1997, the roughness from 30 years of commercial kitchen work, the strength of a man who's been lifting and building and fixing since he was 15, who held me at my culinary school graduation and didn't shake, even though my mother told me later he'd cried in the car and pulled himself together in the parking lot before coming inside because he didn't want me to see. He placed those hands flat on the tablecloth and folded them carefully, and it was the most precise and devastating thing I had ever seen him do. What it meant was, I am making myself smaller. I am performing the posture of a man who is fine with where he has been put. My father has never been fine with injustice. He was performing it now because this was my night, and he was not going to be the reason it went wrong. I turned away before he could see my face. The first course was served at 7:30, artichoke bruschetta on white porcelain, the kind of appetizer that communicates budget without delivering satisfaction. At 7:45, Anthony Ferrara called for attention. Before the evening's program, we'll hear from the families of our couple. I reached for the program at my place setting, opened it. Welcome from the DeLuca family. Remarks from Ginevra DeLuca. I scanned the page, the quartet interlude, the dinner courses, the engagement toast. Carmen Reyes-Ochoa's name was not there. She had been third on the program I approved, after Ginevra, before the interlude. Remarks from Carmen Reyes-Ochoa. 5 minutes. I had told my mother she had 5 minutes, and she had spent 3 weeks preparing, had called me twice to read drafts, once to ask whether a new opening was stronger. Her name was not on the program. I looked up. Across the room, at table 7, my mother was looking at her copy. I watched her eyes move down the page, find the place where her name should be and wasn't. She closed the program, folded it once along the original crease, and slid it under her bread plate so it was no longer visible. She did not look up to find my face. She straightened her napkin and turned to say something to my Aunt Rosa. Ginevra DeLuca was a beautiful speaker. I won't take that from her. Warm, precise, moving through the room's attention like she'd been given a map of it. She spoke about Marco as a child, Marco as a young man, Marco's loyalty and his father's influence. She said the word family 11 times. She did not mention my name, Raíces, my parents, or the 30 years that had built the woman her son had asked to marry him. 4 minutes and 20 seconds. She raised her glass, the room raised theirs. And the 5 minutes my mother had spent 3 weeks preparing for dissolved into cutlery and polite conversation without ever existing at all. I excused myself between courses. I had the conversation mapped, controlled, private. I need my mother's toast reinstated. I need my family moved back to their assigned table. I'm asking you to do both before the second course is cleared. I was going to try the reasonable thing first, because the unreasonable thing is always still available after. The corridor outside the dining room ran the length of the house, quieter, the party sound muffled by old walls. I came around the corner and stopped. Ginevra was near the far window. Her sister Rosaria was beside her, holding Prosecco, speaking in the lowered voice of someone who considers the conversation private. They had their backs to me. The terrace music softened the room just enough that my footsteps hadn't announced me. I stood still. Rosaria said, "She's lovely, Ginny, very pretty. And that restaurant, everyone's talking about it." Ginevra made a sound that was not quite agreement. "She's talented, yes." Marco seems very happy. He is. A pause. The pause of someone choosing a word. He chose with his heart. I understand that. I just have to manage what comes with it. Rosaria lowered her voice. The parents? The father? The trattoria in Dorville, yes. And the mother. A sip of wine, unhurried. She's been here 30 years and she's still... A small dismissive turn of the wrist that translated without ambiguity to still not quite right. Marco sees what he wants to see. And Raises? They gave it a full review in the journal, didn't they? They did. Ginevra's voice carried the warmth of someone complimenting a child's drawing. It's charming, for what it is. The music moved into a new phrase. For what it is. 4 words. The most refined contempt I have ever heard, dressed so carefully in compliment that someone passing might have mistaken it for praise, as though raíces were a category, as though my grandmother's recipes rendered into a critically acclaimed restaurant or a ceiling established elsewhere that no amount of work or love could raise. I thought about the walk-in freezer where I'd cried for 4 minutes after the journal review, the gutted laundromat, the bank loan, the menu written and rewritten at midnight. Every plate that left my path held to one standard, not good for what it is, but as good as it can possibly be, which I have always understood to be the only standard worth having. For what it is. In those 4 seconds, something finished. Not broke, finished. The way a process reaches its natural end. The 18 months of graciousness, the calculations about which battles to absorb, the version of myself that had been standing in rooms in this house making herself legible to people who had already decided not to read her. That version was done. I turned and walked back toward the dining room, steady, the rhythm of someone who knows where she is going. I found Camila near the entrance. She watches a room the way a restaurant floor manager watches one, without appearing to. She took one look at my face and set down her glass. "Tell me," she said. I told her in 40 seconds. Seating chart, program, the corridor, all of it. Camila listened without interrupting. When I finished, "What do you need?" "Marco first." "I'll be right here." I found Marco at the bar, laughing with Anthony Ferrara. He saw me coming and something shifted. Not worry, readiness. The readiness of a man who had been expecting this and decided how to have it. "I was in the corridor," I said. "I heard your mother and Rosaria. She said my restaurant is charming for what it is. She said my mother still hasn't gotten it right after 30 years. He set down his drink and turned to face me. I could see him assembling the response, the careful pieces. "Vale, my mother. I know what your mother is. I've known for 18 months. I'm not asking you to explain her. I'm asking you to go into that dining room and tell her, in front of Rosaria, that she was wrong. About my restaurant, about my parents. Right now." He looked at me. He looked across the room at table 1, his father, the Castellanos, Ginevra back in her seat, luminous, managing the room with the ease of a woman who has never once wondered whether she belonged in it. He looked back at me. "Okay, let's get through tonight. I'll handle it tomorrow." I looked at his face for the last time that night, expecting to find something that would change what came next. The man who'd asked about tomatoes at a farmer's market, who said extraordinary like it meant something, who said he wanted to know my father. He was there. I could see him. He just wasn't going to move. "Okay," I said. I walked away from the bar, not toward our table, not toward table 1, toward the terrace, where the string quartet was playing and a microphone stand waited beside the floral arrangement. Camila's footsteps fell in behind me without being asked. From table 7, I heard a chair push back. Sophia, standing because Sophia has always known before I say it what needs to happen. I passed table 7 without stopping, but I felt my father's eyes find me, and I didn't look at him, because if I had, I would have seen his hands still folded on the tablecloth, still trying to be small, and I needed my hands steady for what came next. The string quartet finished its phrase. The room had not noticed me yet. I stepped up to the microphone, adjusted it the way I adjust a flame under a sauce, small, precise, exactly right. The nearest table turned to look, then the one beside it. Attention moved through the room like heat moves through a kitchen, table by table, quiet spreading in its wake. 60 faces turned toward the terrace. I looked at the room, let the silence sit for exactly as long as it needed to. Then I spoke. I did not begin with anger. Anger has a shape people recognize. It rises, peaks, gives the room permission to dismiss it. I have watched angry people in difficult rooms my whole life and watched the room wait them out, wait for the heat to pass, then go back to what it was doing before. Anger is weather. People know how to wait for weather. What I had was clarity, the specific clarity of a sauce that has been reducing for hours and has arrived, without drama, at exactly what it was always going to be. Thank you all for being here tonight. My voice came through the speakers even and warm, the same voice I use addressing my kitchen staff before a big service. Not loud, not performative, just present. Before we go any further, I need to say a few words about family. The room went the specific, deeper quiet of people who understand what is coming is not a toast. Most of you were given a program tonight. Look at it for a moment. The soft friction of 60 programs opening. You'll notice remarks from one family. The DeLuca family is represented. The Reyes-Ochoa family is not. That was not the program I approved. The program I approved included remarks from my mother, Carmen Reyes-Ochoa, who spent 3 weeks preparing her toast. Her name was removed this afternoon without my knowledge. The same afternoon, my entire family was moved from table 1 to table 7. I turned slightly, the way you indicate direction in a kitchen. Table 7 is the last table in the room, next to the catering station. 60 heads turned. I watched it move table by table, the truth traveling through the room the way heat travels, because that is the nature of both. You cannot hold either back once they have started. I watched Maria Castellano's hand go to her husband's arm. I watched Anthony Ferrara's smile go very still. I watched Dominic DeLuca study the tablecloth in front of him with the focused attention of a man reading something that is not there. I watched Ginevra, posture perfect, expression composed, but her hands on the champagne flute had tightened, knuckles pale against the crystal, the specific whitening of a grip trying to look like no grip at all. The person who made those changes, I said, was Ginevra DeLuca. Silence. The particular silence of a room that has stopped breathing together. This is not a feeling. These are not impressions. The event coordinator confirmed that Mrs. DeLuca altered the seating chart and claimed my approval for changes I never gave. My mother's name was not an oversight. It was a removal. I looked at the room, at Camila near the entrance, steady as a sous chef on a Saturday night, at Sophia beside table 7, arms crossed, focused, at my father, hands no longer folded, spread flat and wide now on the tablecloth. The hands of a man who has stopped trying to be small. Good, I thought. Good. I want to tell you about the people at table 7 because they deserve to be told in a room this size rather than in the car on the way home. My father, Ernesto Reyes, came to Atlanta from Oaxaca in 1992 with $200 and a recipe his mother had been making for 40 years. He parked a food cart on Buford Highway in 1994 and stayed until he sold out, every single day. He saved enough to rent a space, then to buy it. He has been at that address for 22 years, and the line outside on Saturday mornings has never gotten shorter. I let the room sit with that arithmetic. My mother came to this city speaking no English. She learned it because she was staying. She spent 20 years as a bilingual aide in Chambly schools. She knows the names of children who are now bringing their own children to those same schools. She prepared a toast tonight about love and about watching your daughter build something from nothing. She practiced it until she knew it without notes. She sat at table 7, opened her program, found her 5 minutes had been given to someone else, folded the program under her bread plate, and said nothing. A woman at table 4 pressed a napkin to the corner of her eye. I built Raíces 4 years ago in a gutted laundromat. The menu is built on my grandmother's recipes, my father's techniques, 30 years of my mother's kitchen. A food critic called it a revelation. Someone in this room called it charming. I looked at Ginevra. For what it is. The 4 words landed like something placed rather than thrown. Ginevra's chin lifted a fraction of an inch. The only move she made. I want everyone here to understand what those words mean. Good, given its limitations. Impressive, within its category. The category she has placed my parents in, my grandmother's recipes, my father's 22 years, my mother's English, and the restaurant I built with my own hands. That is not a category. That is a life, and it deserves a place at any table it chooses to sit at. I looked at my parents. Mama, Papa, you were supposed to be at table 1 tonight. I'm asking you to come forward. My father stood first, unhurried, not performing the decision for anyone. He straightened his jacket, not the nervous adjustment from the front step, the adjustment of a man settling into himself. He extended his hand to my mother. She took it. She stood. They walked from table 7 through the center of the dining room in complete silence. The only sound, the steady percussion of my father's dress shoes on hardwood. The sound of a man who has been walking through rooms that underestimated him for 30 years and has never once broken his stride. I stepped down from the terrace and met them in the center of the room. Frank Costello stood from table 1. He crossed the room and stopped in front of my father. I know your place on Beeford Highway. My father went from the beginning. He said it was the best thing he'd eaten in Atlanta. He extended his hand. I should have introduced myself properly when I arrived. I'm sorry. My father shook it and held it a moment longer than necessary. His version of accepted. Then came the sound of a chair. Slow, deliberate. The scrape of someone not being hurried and not being helped. Lucia De Luca stood. 84 years old, not tall, possessing the physical authority of someone who is long since not needing height or volume to command a room. She declined the assistance immediately offered, straightened herself fully, and began crossing the dining room. The room watched the way it watches something that cannot be rushed. She stopped in front of my mother. I came to this city in 1962. 2 suitcases and the address of a cousin with a spare room. People open the door sometimes, and sometimes they did not. She paused. I know what it is to be told your table is in the back. She took my mother's hand in both of hers. Your daughter is a remarkable woman. What happened here tonight was wrong. I was at table 1 and I did not say so, and that is also wrong. I'm saying it now. My mother's eyes filled. She pressed Lucia's hand. Gracias, señora. Lucia nodded once, looked at me, then made her way back to table 1 and sat with the stillness of a woman who has done what she came to do. Something had gone out of Ginevra's face. Not the composure, that was structural. She likely would never lose it, but the certainty behind it. The architecture of the evening had been built on the certainty that she controlled this room. That certainty had just been dismantled, quietly and irrevocably, by an 84-year-old woman from Palermo who did not raise her voice once. Dominic De Luca put his hand over Ginevra's, not tenderly, grounding, and for the first time in 2.5 years, I watched Ginevra De Luca have no move to make. Marco found me on the terrace afterward. He stopped a few feet away. We stood in that distance, which was honest, the right amount of space for what the evening had been. I should have stopped her months ago, he said. I saw it happening, and I made a calculation every time. I told myself it was manageable. I kept telling myself tomorrow. I know. I'm sorry, Vale. I looked at his face, the face of a man who meant it, for whom meaning it was genuinely painful, and for whom meaning it was also, by itself, not enough. We both knew it. The knowing was one of the few honest things we'd shared all evening. Sorry is a start, I said, but I don't know what it starts yet. I need time. How much? I don't know. That's an honest answer. He nodded. He looked at the Atlanta skyline, the distant lights of the same city, a different altitude. Your father, he said. I need to. That conversation is between you and him. I'm not mediating it. Whatever we are right now, and I genuinely don't know, your relationship with my parents has to be built by you, not for me, not to fix tonight, because you understand what you owe them. He went back inside. I stayed on the terrace. The Atlanta air was warm the way it is in April, soft, slightly humid, smelling like something growing. And then, from somewhere inside, I heard my father laugh. That specific laugh, the one from the chest, the one that means something has genuinely delighted him. Someone had said something true to Ernesto Velez, and he had laughed because of it. It was the best thing I heard all night. Marco came to my parents' house in Doraville 3 weeks later, alone, called ahead and asked my father if he could come. My father said yes. I was not there, deliberately. Some conversations need to happen without the woman they are nominally about, because they are actually about the people having them. My mother called me after. She said he was there 2 hours. My father made coffee. They talked. I asked what about. She said my father asked him what kind of man he wanted to be, not who he was, who he wanted to be. Marco and I are not back to where we were. What we are is in progress, the deliberate, unglamorous, unguaranteed kind that comes with no timeline or warranty. He told his mother, in my presence, 1 month after the rehearsal dinner, that what she had done was wrong and would not happen again. No qualifier, no softening. He said it and let it land and didn't look at me afterward for a grade. That was something. Whether it is enough is a question I am still answering on a timeline that is mine. Ginevra sent white peonies to Raices 2 weeks later. I put them in the dining room where my guests could enjoy them. I did not send a response. Lucia calls on Sunday evenings. We talk for 20 minutes, sometimes longer, about Atlanta in 1962, about people who opened doors and people who didn't, and the lifelong knowledge of the difference. She never mentions the rehearsal dinner directly. The call itself is the mention. I always answer. Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Doraville. The kitchen table with the 6 mismatched chairs. My father's wooden chair with arms. My mother's with the crocheted cushion. Sophia's dining chair with the wobbly leg she insists she prefers, and we all know she's lying and nobody corrects it because some things are just the texture of a family. My chair is the folding one from the garage, padded seat. I prefer it to most chairs I have ever sat in. Camila is here. Jesse Torres, who she's been seeing since January, is beside her, a quiet man who builds furniture in his off hours and looks at Camila the way you look at a piece of work you cannot believe came out this well. Sophia is demonstrating with full physical commitment what Anthony Ferrara's face looked like when I took the microphone. Everyone is laughing too hard to eat. My father's horchata, my mother's chicken, my Aunt Rosa's tamales. Too much food for 7 people. We eat it all anyway. There are no place cards on this table, no seating charts. Nobody was arranged here by someone deciding who belongs in front and who belongs in back. Every person chose this chair. Every person is exactly where they are supposed to be. This is my table 1. It has always been my table 1. I spent 2.5 years pretending it needed a country club to confirm it. I built Raices because my grandmother's recipes deserved a room, because my parents' 30 years deserved a room, because I deserved a room, not because the right people would finally recognize me, but because the work was worth it, and I already knew that, and I had simply, for a season, let someone else make me doubt it. You cannot call something charming and mean it as a ceiling. You cannot seat someone beside a catering cart and mean it as a verdict. You cannot remove a woman's name from a program and mean it as an edit. You can try, but the woman will find the microphone. She always does. That is my story, and now I want yours. Not a reaction, not a validation, your actual honest take, whatever it is. If you think I made the right call, tell me. If you think I went too far, tell me that. If this reminded you of a table you were put at, a room that tried to make you small, a name removed from somewhere it was supposed to be, drop it in the comments. I read every one. This story is worth exactly as much as the conversation it starts. You know where you come from. Don't ever let anyone seat you anywhere else. Hey guys, I really appreciate you all for staying through. Your support and viewerships keeps me inspired to giving you new stories daily. Stay tuned as I serve you new, unmatched stories every day. See you in my next video.